December in Adelaide arrives like a held breath released. The summer of 1948 settles over South Australia with a weight that feels almost visible, a shimmering curtain of heat that turns the air thick and drowsy. At Somerton Beach, the morning comes gently. The sun climbs over the horizon at 5:30, painting the sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold, and by 6 o'clock the light has turned crystalline, sharp, the kind of brightness that makes you squint even in memory. The sand here is fine and pale, almost white under the early sun. It holds the coolness of night for a few precious minutes before the heat seeps in, grain by grain, transforming the beach into a vast, sun-bleached canvas. The Indian Ocean whispers against the shore in soft, rhythmic exhalations, a gentle susurrus that sounds like secrets being told and retold, over and over, to no one in particular. This is the smell of an Australian summer morning by the sea, salt and seaweed, the briny perfume of kelp drying on hot sand, the faint mineral scent of shells crushed to powder by endless tides. There is something elemental about it, something that speaks to the edge of the world, the place where land surrenders to water and the familiar gives way to the unknown. On the morning of December 1, 1948, Somerton Beach looks like a postcard of itself. A few early swimmers dot the shallows. Children chase the retreating waves, their laughter carried on the breeze. Couples walk hand in hand along the firm wet sand where the ocean has smoothed away yesterday's footprints. It is a Wednesday morning, ordinary in every way, the kind of morning that will be forgotten by everyone who experiences it. Except for one thing. Except for the man sleeping against the seawall. John Lyons notices him at approximately 6:30 in the morning. Lyons is a jeweler, a precise man accustomed to looking closely at things, to noticing details that others might miss. He is taking his regular morning walk along the beach, following the concrete seawall that separates the sand from the parkland beyond, when he sees the figure propped up against the wall, maybe 30 yards ahead. At first, Lyons thinks nothing of it. People sleep on beaches. It happens. The night before was hot, perhaps someone had come down seeking the cool breeze off the ocean, had dozed off watching the stars. But as Lyons draws closer, something begins to feel wrong, though he couldn't say exactly what. The man is leaning back against the seawall at an angle, his head resting on the concrete as if it were a pillow. His legs are stretched out before him, crossed at the ankles. His right arm lies across his body, the hand resting near his left side. He looks, for all the world, like someone who has simply decided to take a rest. Like someone who might open his eyes at any moment and ask the time. Lyons passes by. He glances at the man, notes the stillness, the odd formality of the posture, and keeps walking. Something nags at him, but the morning is beautiful and the thought dissolves in the brightness of the day. He will return later, though. Hours later. And the man will still be there, in exactly the same position, head tilted back, eyes closed, as if time itself has stopped moving for him alone. By the time the police arrive in the early evening, rigor mortis has set in. The man against the seawall is not sleeping. He is dead. And he has been dead, the doctors will later determine, since sometime in the early hours of the morning, perhaps around 2 a.m., when the beach was empty and dark and the only witnesses were the stars. But let us return to that moment of first seeing. Let us look at him as Lyons did, as others will throughout that long, hot day, with curiosity, then confusion, then a creeping sense of wrongness. Because the man is wearing a suit. Not beach clothes. Not the casual attire of someone who came down to watch the sunset and fell asleep. A full suit. A complete, formal suit, the kind you wear to an office or a dinner party or a funeral. The jacket is brown, well tailored, sitting properly on his shoulders even in death. Beneath it, a white shirt, clean and pressed. A tie, knotted carefully at his throat, a burgundy tie with a subtle pattern. The trousers matched the jacket, creased sharply down the front of each leg. And his shoes are polished, leather, the kind that click on pavement, entirely unsuitable for sand. He is dressed as if for an appointment. As if he had somewhere important to be. But he is lying on a beach. The juxtaposition is surreal, dreamlike. It violates the natural order of things in a way that's difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. Sand belongs with bare feet and swimsuits. Suits belong in the city, in offices with closed doors and secretaries and the clatter of typewriters. To see them combined, a suited man on sand, is to witness a collision of worlds that should never touch. It feels like a painting by Magritte. A man in a bowler hat floating in the sky. A green apple obscuring a face. Perfectly ordinary elements arranged in a way that transforms them into something uncanny, something that hovers in the space between the real and the unreal. The sand around him is undisturbed. There are no signs of struggle, no drag marks, no scuffed footprints telling a story of violence. He is simply there, as if placed by an invisible hand, posed with an almost artistic precision. When the police finally examine the body properly, they find more details to add to the portrait of strangeness. The man is handsome. Strikingly so. His face is weathered but strong, with a prominent jaw and a high forehead. His hair, combed back neatly, shows only the first touches of gray at the temples. He looks to be in his early to mid-40s, but his body tells a different story. This is a man who kept himself in exceptional physical condition. His calves are muscular, powerfully developed. His shoulders are broad. This is someone who walked, who moved, who was vital and alive. Was. There is something else. Something small but deeply unsettling. Resting on his collar, just below his right ear, is a cigarette. An unburnt cigarette, a Kensitas brand, balanced perfectly as if it has been placed there deliberately. Or as if, and this is what the detectives will come to believe, it fell from his mouth as he died. As if he had been smoking, and the cigarette simply tumbled from his lips in that final moment, landing on his collar and staying there, unsmoked, a tiny monument to interrupted routine. The doctors examine him carefully. They search for signs of violence, for wounds, for anything that might explain why a healthy man in his prime would be dead on a beach on a summer morning. They find nothing. No marks on his skin. No bruises. No cuts. No bullet wounds. No signs of strangulation. His skull is intact. His ribs are unbroken. It is as if he simply stopped. As if some essential switch was flipped off, and everything that made him alive, the breath in his lungs, the beat of his heart, the electrical fire in his brain, was extinguished like a candle in the wind. But there is something. In his stomach, the pathologist will later find, there is some evidence of a recent meal and signs that might indicate poisoning, though nothing conclusive. His spleen is enlarged, 3 times its normal size. His liver is congested with blood. These are clues, perhaps, but they point in no clear direction. They raise more questions than they answer. The police search his pockets. This, at least, should be straightforward. Everyone carries something, a wallet, papers, letters, something with a name. They find a metal comb. Simple, utilitarian, the kind sold in any chemist shop. They find a half-empty packet of juicy fruit chewing gum. The foil wrapper crinkled from use, a few sticks missing. They find a packet of Army Club cigarettes. But when they open it, the cigarettes inside are a different brand, Kensitas, the expensive ones. 7 cigarettes total. Someone, presumably the dead man, had been using the cheaper packet to carry the more expensive tobacco. They find 2 tickets in his pocket. One is a bus ticket from Adelaide to Glenelg, used, dated for the day before. The other is a train ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, unused. These suggest movement, a journey, plans that changed or were never completed. They find nothing else. No wallet. No money. No identification of any kind. No letters addressed to anyone. No business cards. No receipts with a signature. No photographs of loved ones. No keys to a home or a car. Nothing with a name. The pockets of a man contain the archaeology of his life, the receipts and ticket stubs and folded notes that map out his days, his habits, his connections to the world. This man's pockets are a void. They tell a story of careful erasure, of deliberate anonymity. And then they discover the final, chilling detail. The man's clothes are well made, of good quality. The suit was expensive, not custom-tailored perhaps, but certainly not cheap. The shirt is fine cotton. Everything suggests a man of at least modest means, someone who cared about his appearance. But every single label has been removed. Not torn off carelessly. Cut away. Cut away with precision, with intent. The tailor's mark in the jacket, gone. The maker's label in the shirt, missing. The brand stamp on the tie, absent. Even the shoes, when they examine them closely, show signs that identifying marks have been deliberately obscured. Someone, and the police assume it was the man himself, has gone through every article of clothing and systematically removed anything that might reveal where they were purchased, where he shopped, what his habits were. It is the act of someone who wanted to be anonymous, who needed to be anonymous, who understood that clothes carry their own fingerprints, their own traceable history. It is the act of a ghost preparing to haunt. The sun climbs higher. The beach fills with more people. Word begins to spread, there's a dead man by the seawall, the police are there, no one knows who he is. By afternoon, the body is removed, covered with a sheet and carried to the morgue on a stretcher. The sand where he lay shows only a slight depression, a shadow in the shape of a man. By evening, even this will be gone, smoothed away by the wind and the feet of evening strollers. But the questions remain, suspended in the hot December air like the shimmer of heat above asphalt. Who was he? Where did he come from? What brought him to Somerton Beach on a summer night, dressed as if for a meeting, carrying cigarettes and gum but no identification? Why were his labels cut away? How did he die? And beneath all these questions, a deeper one, one that will echo through the decades. Did he come here to die? Or did death come for him? The waves continue their gentle conversation with the shore. The sun beats down, relentless and bright. And somewhere in Adelaide, someone is missing this man, or perhaps, more disturbingly, no one is missing him at all. The Somerton man has arrived at his final resting place, a mystery wrapped in a brown suit, lying on the sand like a question the universe forgot to answer. The morgue is cold. Not the cold of winter, but the artificial cold of refrigeration, of preservation, of stopping time. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, casting everything in a flat, clinical brightness that erases shadows and makes the world look like an overexposed photograph. On the steel table lies the Somerton man. In death, stripped of his brown suit and burgundy tie, he looks smaller somehow, more vulnerable. The doctors, pathologist John Barclay Bennett and his colleagues, circle the body like priests around an altar, performing their rituals of measurement and incision, searching for the story written in flesh and organ and blood. They work methodically. This is what they do. Bodies tell stories, if you know how to read them. A bruise reveals violence. A clogged artery speaks of diet and stress. The contents of a stomach map out a final meal. The human body is a text, and pathologists are its translators. But this body, it seems, is written in a language they don't quite understand. The external examination reveals what they already know: no wounds, no trauma, no signs of struggle. The skin is intact. The bones are whole. This is not a murder that announced itself with knife or gun or bludgeon. Whatever killed this man was subtle, invisible, leaving no fingerprints on the flesh. The autopsy begins. They open him carefully, making the Y-incision across the chest, peeling back skin and muscle to reveal the architecture beneath. And here, finally, they find anomalies. Not answers, but clues, fragments of a puzzle that refuses to form a coherent picture. The spleen is enormous. 3 times its normal size, congested with blood, swollen like a dark purple balloon. This could indicate many things: an infection, perhaps, or a reaction to poison. But there are no other signs of infection, no fever recorded before death, no inflammation in the surrounding tissues. The liver, too, is engorged with blood. The stomach shows signs of distress, the lining is inflamed, irritated. When they examine the contents, they find the remnants of a pasty, likely consumed within hours of death. But mixed with the digested food, there is something else, a suggestion of congestion, a vascular reaction, the kind of pattern that might indicate poisoning. They test for everything they can think of. Arsenic, cyanide, strychnine. The common poisons, the ones that appear in detective novels and criminal trials. They test for barbiturates, for morphine, for any of the usual suspects that might stop a heart or silence lungs. The results come back negative. Every single one. Dr. Bennett sits in his office, reading the toxicology reports by the yellow light of his desk lamp, and allows himself a moment of frustration. He has been a pathologist for decades. He has seen bodies pulled from car wrecks and house fires, drowning victims and murder victims, suicides and accidents, and every permutation of death the human imagination can conceive. He knows his craft. But this man, this perfectly preserved, well-dressed man with no name, has died from something that leaves no trace. They begin to suspect digitalis, or perhaps some rare toxin derived from plants, something that might metabolize quickly, disappearing from the blood within hours, leaving behind only the ghost of its effects. The enlarged spleen, the congested organs, the rapid death, these could be consistent with such a poison. But without a trace, without evidence, it remains speculation. A theory floating in the void. In his official report, Dr. Bennett will write that the cause of death is consistent with poisoning, possibly by a barbiturate or a digitalis-type substance. But he will note, with the caution of a scientist who knows the limits of his knowledge, that no poison was definitively found. It is, in a way, a perfect death. Clean. Untraceable. leaving behind a body that tells a story without words, a mystery without solution. The Somerton man's body is photographed, fingerprinted, measured, and catalogued. His fingerprints are sent to police departments across Australia, then across the British Commonwealth. His photograph appears in newspapers, accompanied by appeals. Do you know this man? Have you seen him? No one comes forward. It is as if he materialized on Somerton Beach fully formed, with no past, no history, no connection to the world of the living. January 1949. The heat continues, day after day, unrelenting. Adelaide shimmers in the summer sun like a city reflected in troubled water. At the Adelaide railway station, in the unclaimed luggage office, a clerk is going through the items that have been sitting too long on the shelves, gathering dust, waiting for owners who never return. There are suitcases and parcels and forgotten packages, each one a small story of interrupted travel, of plans that changed. One item catches the clerk's attention, a brown suitcase, medium-sized, unremarkable in every way except for the date it was checked in. November 30, 1948. The day before the body was found at Somerton Beach. The clerk remembers the police inquiries, the photographs in the newspaper. He opens the suitcase. Inside are clothes, toiletries, a few odd items. He calls the police. Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean arrives to examine the suitcase. He is a careful man, methodical, the kind of detective who believes that every detail matters, that the truth is hidden in the accumulation of small facts. He opens the suitcase in the police station's evidence room, laying out the contents on a table under bright lights. The first thing he notices is the thread. There is orange thread in the suitcase, distinctive orange thread, wound on a spool, the kind used for repairs. It is a specific shade, bright and unmistakable, what dressmakers call barber thread, manufactured by a particular company. Lean's mind makes the connection instantly. He retrieves the dead man's clothes from storage, examining them under magnification. And there it is, the trousers have been repaired recently, a neat patch job on the inner leg, sewn with orange thread. Barber thread. The exact same shade, the exact same type. The suitcase belongs to the Somerton man. There is no longer any doubt. Lean catalogues the contents with the precision of an archaeologist excavating an ancient tomb. Each item is photographed, labeled, entered into the record. And as he works, the strangeness deepens. There are clothes, shirts, trousers, a jacket. All of good quality, well maintained, neatly folded. And just like the clothes found on the body, every single label has been carefully removed. Someone has gone through each garment with scissors or a blade, cutting away the manufacturer's marks, the size tags, the store labels. It is painstaking work, methodical work, the work of someone who understood the traceable nature of commercial goods. There is a stenciling brush, the kind used to paint names or identification marks on luggage or cargo. The bristles are stiff and worn, suggesting frequent use. Was the dead man a merchant sailor? A cargo handler? Or was this tool used for something else entirely, perhaps for creating false identities, for stenciling fake names onto documents or possessions? There is a knife, but it has been modified. The blade has been cut down, ground to a sharp point, transformed from a common kitchen knife into something more specialized. A weapon? A tool for a specific trade? The modification is careful, professional. This was done by someone who knew what they were doing. There is a pair of scissors. A screwdriver. A small sewing kit with more of that distinctive orange thread. The accumulated tools of someone who traveled light, who could repair their own clothes, who was self-sufficient. And there is a tie with a name on it. This is the only label left intact in the entire suitcase, a tie with "Keen" embroidered on it, or perhaps printed in small letters. The detective sees on this immediately. Finally, a name. Finally, something solid. They search for anyone named Keen in the Adelaide area. They publish the name in newspapers. They follow every lead, chasing down every Keen they can find, asking if they've lost a tie, if they recognize the man in the photographs. Nothing. Every Keen they find has never heard of the Somerton man. None of them are missing a tie. It is either a coincidence, perhaps the tie was purchased second-hand, or borrowed, or stolen, or it is deliberate misdirection, a false clue planted to lead investigators down a dead-end path. The suitcase offers connection without revelation. It proves the dead man was in Adelaide before his death, that he had been traveling, that he had planned to stay at least a few days. But it doesn't tell them his name. It doesn't tell them where he came from or why he died on a beach wearing his best suit. If anything, the suitcase deepens the mystery. Because the care taken to remove every label, the modified knife, the stenciling brush, these suggest a man who lived on the edges of legality, someone accustomed to moving through the world without leaving traces, someone who understood the importance of anonymity. A spy, perhaps. A criminal. A smuggler. Or simply a man running from something, trying to disappear so completely that even death couldn't give him a name. Months pass. The investigation slows, then stalls. The body, still unidentified, is embalmed and kept in storage at the morgue. The police hold on to hope that someone, somewhere, will come forward. But the calls stop coming. The leads dry up. The Somerton man begins to fade from public consciousness, becoming just another unsolved case, another file in a cabinet of mysteries. But Detective Lean doesn't let go. He returns to the evidence again and again, searching for something they might have missed. And in June of 1949, 6 months after the body was found, he decides to re-examine the dead man's clothes one more time. He takes the trousers, the ones with the orange thread repair, and goes through them pocket by pocket, seam by seam. The watch pocket is particularly small, a tiny pouch sewn into the waistband, the kind designed to hold a pocket watch in the days before wristwatches became common. It's easy to miss, easy to overlook. Lean pushes his fingers into the pocket. At first, he feels nothing. Then, there. A small lump, something hard and cylindrical, pushed deep into the fabric. He works it out carefully, teasing it through the narrow opening. It takes patience. The object is wedged in tight, compressed, as if it has been deliberately hidden. Finally, it comes free. It is a small piece of paper, rolled into a tight cylinder, no larger than a cigarette butt. The paper is slightly yellowed, with a distinctive texture, not ordinary paper, but something finer, with a subtle grain to it. Lean unrolls it carefully, spreading it flat on the table under the examination lamp. The paper is a scrap torn from a larger page. The edges are rough, ragged, showing where it was ripped away from its source. And on one side, printed in an elegant, distinctive typeface, are 2 words in Persian script, followed by their English translation. Tamam Shud. Lean stares at the words. He doesn't recognize the language immediately, but the script is clearly not English, not in its original form. Below the Persian characters, someone has helpfully translated, "the end," or, more precisely, "it is finished." He feels the hair rise on the back of his neck. This is not a random scrap of paper. This is deliberate. This is a message. The paper itself has a quality to it, a weight and texture that suggests it came from a book, not a modern paperback, but an older volume, perhaps something printed with care, with attention to aesthetics. The typeface is distinctive, ornate, the kind used in special editions or literary works. Lean begins to research. He consults with professors at the University of Adelaide, with linguists and scholars of Persian literature. And they identify the source. Tamam Shud, or more formally, Tamam Shud, is the final phrase of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of Persian poetry translated into English by Edward Fitzgerald in the 19th century. The Rubaiyat is a meditation on mortality, on the fleeting nature of life, on drinking wine and loving deeply because tomorrow we die. And Tamam Shud is how it ends, the final words of the final quatrain. Indeed the idols I have loved so long have done my credit in this world much wrong, have drowned my glory in a shallow cup, and sold my reputation for a song. And then, after the last verse, Tamam Shud. It is finished. The Somerton man was carrying, in a secret pocket of his trousers, the ending of a poem about death. In the silence of the evidence room, the tiny scrap of paper sits under glass, 2 words in an ancient language, a message from a dead man. It is finished. But what is finished? His life? His mission? His story? Or is this the beginning, the first real clue in a mystery that will refuse to be solved, a puzzle that will haunt investigators for generations to come? The fluorescent lights hum. The paper lies still, its edges ragged, its meaning obscure. And somewhere in Adelaide, if the police are right, there is a book with a missing page, a volume of poetry that holds the key to everything. If they can only find it. July 1949. 7 months after the body was found. Winter has come to Adelaide, bringing cold winds off the ocean and grey skies that hang low over the city like a shroud. A man walks into the detective office on Peary Street. He is uncomfortable, hesitant, the way people are when they're not sure if what they know is important or if they're wasting everyone's time. His name is Ronald Francis, and he has a story that doesn't quite make sense, even to him. In late November or early December of 1948, he can't remember the exact date, it was around the time that man was found on the beach. Francis had driven to Somerton Beach with his brother-in-law. They parked near the beach, walked down to look at the ocean, spent maybe half an hour there, then returned to the car and drove home. The next day, or perhaps the day after that, again, memory is uncertain, time blurs, Francis found a book in the back seat of his car. Just sitting there, on the rear shelf where the back window meets the seat. A small book, bound in dark covers, a little worn from use. He picked it up, glanced at it, saw it was poetry, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, translated by Edward Fitzgerald, and tossed it aside. Poetry wasn't his interest. He assumed someone had left it there, though he couldn't think who. Maybe it had been there for weeks and he'd simply never noticed. The book sat in his car, forgotten, sliding around on the back shelf as he drove, gathering dust and sunlight, becoming part of the car's landscape of forgotten things. Until he saw the newspaper appeals. Until he read about the police searching for a copy of the Rubaiyat with a missing page. And something in his memory clicked, aligned, made him go out to the car and actually look at the book he'd been driving around with for months. The final page was torn out. Detective Lean takes the book from Ronald Francis with hands that are steady but urgent. This is it. This has to be it. The odds of 2 copies of the Rubaiyat with torn-out final pages being in Adelaide at the same time, one in a dead man's pocket and one in a car parked near where he died, are astronomical. The book is a small octavo edition, bound in dark red cloth that has faded to brown at the edges. The pages are cream-colored, slightly foxed with age, with that particular smell old books have, a mixture of paper and binding glue and time itself, sweet and musty and faintly vanilla. Lean carefully removes the tiny scrap from evidence storage and brings it to his desk. He opens the book to where the final page should be. The stub is still there, a ragged edge of paper, torn roughly, irregularly, leaving a fringe of fibers along the binding. He places the scrap against the torn edge. It fits perfectly. The tear lines match. The paper quality is identical. The typeface continues seamlessly from the torn page to the scrap. You can see where individual letters were ripped in half, the top portion on the stub, the bottom on the scrap. This is the book. The Somerton man's book. Or at least, the book connected to his death, placed in the back of a car parked meters from where he would die. But how did it get there? Did the dead man put it there himself, before walking down to the beach for the last time? Did someone else place it there, a companion, an accomplice, a murderer covering their tracks? Ronald Francis can offer no answers. He never saw anyone near his car that night. He noticed nothing unusual. The book simply appeared, the way things sometimes do in the gaps of our attention. Lean turns the book over in his hands, examining it from every angle. And then, holding it under the lamp, tilting it to catch the light at different angles, he sees something on the back cover. Faint pencil markings. So light they're almost invisible, the kind of marks that might have been partially erased or that were written softly, hesitantly, not meant to be permanent. He takes the book to the police laboratory. They photograph it under different lighting conditions, raking light, ultraviolet light, infrared. They enhance the contrast, making the faint marks visible. And what emerges is this. 5 lines of capital letters, written in pencil on the back cover of the book. Rubaiyat. Mliawi. Tbimpanip. Mliaboyak. Itn Samst Gab. The letters sit there, stark and cryptic under the photographer's lights. They look like code. They feel like code. The formation is too deliberate, too structured to be random. Some lines are crossed out, others modified, as if someone was working through iterations, trying to get something right. There are other markings too. In one place, what appears to be a phone number. In another, seemingly random letters or abbreviations. Detective Lean stares at the sequence of letters and feels the case shift beneath his feet. This is no longer a simple death investigation, no longer just an unidentified body. This is something else. Something that involves codes and hidden messages and a dead man carrying poetry about mortality in his pocket. The police consult with Australian Naval Intelligence. The code, if it is a code, is sent to cryptographers, to men who spent the war breaking Japanese and German ciphers, who understand the mathematics of secrets. They work on it for weeks. They try every method they know. substitution ciphers, where each letter stands for another, transposition ciphers, where the letters are rearranged according to a pattern, book codes, where numbers reference specific words or pages. They run frequency analysis, looking for patterns in how often certain letters appear. They test whether it might be an acronym, with each letter standing for a word. Nothing works. The sequence refuses to resolve into meaning. It resists every attempt to crack it, sitting there in its arrangement of letters like a wall no one can climb. The naval intelligence cryptographers eventually report back, if this is a code, it's one they cannot break. It might be a one-time pad, a cipher that's theoretically unbreakable without the key. It might be a personal code, something that only makes sense to the person who wrote it and perhaps one other person. Or it might not be a code at all, it might be abbreviations, or the first letters of lines from another poem, or notes for something entirely unrelated to espionage. Or, and this is what some of the detectives begin to suspect, it might be deliberately meaningless, a red herring designed to waste time and resources, to send investigators chasing after patterns that don't exist. The code remains unsolved. To this day, decades later, it remains unsolved. People still try, still propose solutions, still insist they've cracked it. But none of the solutions have ever been verified, none have ever led to answers that explain anything about the dead man on the beach. The letters sit there, mocking, inscrutable, Rubaiyat. But there is something else on the back cover. Something more concrete, more traceable than a cipher. A phone number. It's written in the same faint pencil, partially obscured by the other markings, but unmistakably a phone number. 7 digits in the format used by Adelaide in 1948. The police trace it immediately. This is routine work, simple investigation. Every phone number is registered, every line connected to an address and a name. The number belongs to a residence on Mosley Street in Glenelg, a suburb of Adelaide. The address is 400 meters from Somerton Beach. A 5-minute walk. Close enough that you could hear the ocean from the front porch on quiet nights. The name on the phone registry is Jessica Ellen Thompson, but she goes by another name socially, a name she uses as a kind of signature. A personal identifier, Jestin. She is a nurse. 27 years old, married, with a young child. She lives an ordinary life, in an ordinary house, in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knows everyone else and nothing much ever happens. Until the police come knocking. The interrogation room in the Glenelg police station is small and stuffy. The walls are painted institutional green. There's a single window, but the blinds are drawn, turning the afternoon sun into thin stripes of light that fall across the wooden table. Jestin sits across from Detective Lean. She is composed, careful, but there's a tension in her shoulders, a tightness around her mouth that suggests she's holding something back. Lean asks her about the book. Does she know anything about the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam? She admits, after a pause, that yes, she's familiar with it. She had a copy once. During the war, this would have been 1945, she gave it as a gift to a man she knew, a lieutenant in the Australian Army named Alfred Boxall. They'd met at a hospital where she was training. There had been, she implies without quite saying it, some kind of relationship. Not an affair, perhaps, but something more than friendship. She gave him the book before he shipped out. Lean makes a note. This is a solid lead, maybe the lead that breaks the case. They trace Boxall immediately, he's not hard to find, still alive, living in Sydney. When they contact him, Boxall still has his copy of the Rubaiyat, the one Jestin gave him, intact and complete with all its pages. Inside the front cover, in her handwriting, is an inscription, a verse from the poem, and her signature, Justin. So there were 2 copies. Justin gave one to Boxall. But where did the other one come from? The one found in Ronald Francis's car, with the torn page and the cipher on the back cover. Lean presses her. Does she know the man who was found on Somerton Beach? Has she seen the photographs in the newspaper? No, she says. She doesn't recognize him. She's never seen him before. But her hands, Lean notices, are trembling slightly. There's something in her eyes, fear. Recognition. Guilt, that doesn't match her words. He decides to show her the bust. The plaster cast was made from the dead man's face by a local sculptor, commissioned by the police to create a 3-dimensional representation that might trigger recognition where photographs had failed. It's life-sized, eerily lifelike, capturing the strong jaw, the high forehead, the closed eyes. It looks like a death mask from ancient Rome, pale and smooth and frozen in eternal rest. They bring it into the room and place it on the table in front of Justin. Her reaction is immediate and visceral. She goes white. The color drains from her face so quickly it's as if someone has pulled a plug. Her hand goes to her mouth. She sways in her chair, and for a moment Lean thinks she's going to faint, actually lose consciousness right there in the interrogation room. "Are you all right?" he asks. She won't look at the bust. She turns her head away, her whole body recoiling from it. When she finally speaks, her voice is barely above a whisper. "I don't know him," she says. But everything about her body language screams the opposite. This is the reaction of someone who has seen a ghost, someone confronted with something they hoped was buried and forgotten. Lean pushes gently. "Are you sure? Take another look. Please." She refuses. She will not look at the face again. She repeats, more firmly now, as if trying to convince herself as much as the detective, "I don't know him. I've never seen him before." The interview ends shortly after. There's nothing more to be gained. She's shut down completely, withdrawn behind a wall of denial that no amount of questioning can penetrate. As she leaves, Lean watches her walk away down the street toward her house, 400 meters from where a man died carrying a scrap of poetry and her phone number. In the weeks that follow, the investigation takes on a new dimension. The pieces are starting to form a pattern, though what that pattern means is still unclear. The year is 1949. The war ended only 4 years ago, but already a new kind of conflict is brewing, a Cold War, they're calling it, a war of espionage and secrets and proxy battles fought in the shadows. The Soviet Union and the Western powers are locked in a struggle for intelligence, for advantage, for the small betrayals and larger gambits that might tip the balance of power. And Australia, isolated as it is not immune to this new reality. Just inland from Adelaide, in the desert, construction has begun on something extraordinary, the Woomera rocket range. It will be, when completed, one of the most important military testing facilities in the British Commonwealth. Long-range missiles will be tested there, experimental aircraft, advanced guidance systems. The best minds in aerospace engineering are being recruited. Secrets are being generated by the dozen. Could the Somerton man have been connected to this? Could he have been a spy, Soviet, perhaps, or working for some other power, trying to gather intelligence on British and Australian military capabilities. The coded message on the book cover. The removed labels from his clothes. The careful anonymity. The modified knife in his suitcase. His phone number in the possession of a nurse who lives within sight of the beach where he died. And Justin's reaction. Her terror when shown the bust. Her refusal to speak. Was she his contact? His handler? Or was she something else, a lover, a co-conspirator, a person who knew too much and said too little? The Cold War throws its long shadow over the case. Every detail takes on new significance. Every anomaly suggests intrigue. But the evidence remains circumstantial, suggestive rather than conclusive. No one can prove the man was a spy. No one can prove Justin was involved in anything more sinister than giving a book to a soldier during the war. The investigation continues, but it's moving through quicksand now, every step forward met with uncertainty, with the feeling that the truth is just out of reach, visible through fog but impossible to grasp. June 14, 1949. Winter in Adelaide. The sky is pewter grey, heavy with clouds that threaten rain but never quite deliver. At West Terrace Cemetery, a small group has gathered around an open grave. There are perhaps a dozen people, detectives who worked the case, a few journalists, cemetery workers, a priest who never met the deceased but who will say words over him anyway because that's what civilization does, even for the nameless. The coffin is simple, unadorned pine. Inside lies the Somerton man, dressed in the suit he died in, looking as peaceful and enigmatic in death as he did that morning on the beach 7 months ago. The priest reads from the Bible. Dust to dust, ashes to ashes. The eternal word said over countless graves, the script we've written to make sense of the unsensible fact of death. They lower the coffin into the ground. The cemetery workers shovel earth over it, and the sound is rhythmic, methodical, the soft percussion of soil hitting wood, again and again, until the coffin is covered and the man is truly buried. A headstone will be placed later, grey granite with words carved into its face. Here lies the unknown man. Who was found at Somerton Beach. December 1, 1948. The grave becomes one among thousands, a small rectangle of earth in an endless field of the dead. People forget. Life moves on. The Somerton man becomes a footnote, a curiosity, a story told in pubs when the conversation turns to mysteries and unsolved cases. But the earth remembers. The bones remember. And deep in the cells of those bones, locked in the spiral architecture of DNA, there is information waiting. Waiting for time to pass. Waiting for science to catch up. Waiting for someone curious enough and patient enough to ask the right questions. Fast forward. Decades blur past like pages turning in a book left in the wind. 1950s, 1960s. 1970s, the Cold War intensifies, then thaws. Technology advances. Computers shrink from room-sized machines to devices that fit in your pocket. The world changes in ways the people of 1949 could never have imagined. And the science of identification evolves. In the early 2000s, a researcher named Derek Abbott becomes fascinated with the Somerton man case. Abbott is a professor at the University of Adelaide, an engineer by training but a detective by temperament, someone who cannot let a puzzle remain unsolved. He reads everything about the case, studies the photographs, examines the evidence that still exists in police archives and museum collections. He becomes particularly interested in the possibility of using DNA to identify the unknown man. But there's a problem. In 1949, when the body was buried, DNA analysis didn't exist. The techniques, the technology, even the understanding of what DNA was, none of it existed yet. And by the time it did exist, the Somerton man had been in the ground for decades. But Abbott is patient. He waits. He watches as forensic genealogy develops, as the technology becomes more sophisticated, more capable of extracting information from degraded samples, from old bones, from the traces we leave behind. In 2021, 72 years after the burial, permission is finally granted to exhume the body. The exhumation happens quietly, without fanfare. A small team of forensic experts and archaeologists carefully excavate the grave, removing the earth layer by layer until they reach the coffin. When they open it, they find that time has been both cruel and kind. The soft tissues are gone, decomposed long ago. But the skeleton remains, intact, lying in the configuration of the body that was placed there in 1949. The bones are stained brown from the earth, but they're solid, preserved by the chemistry of the soil. They take samples carefully, reverently. A tooth, teeth are excellent sources of DNA, protected by enamel from degradation. A section of bone from the femur. These are transported to a laboratory where technicians extract whatever genetic material remains. The DNA is fragmented, damaged by time and moisture and the slow work of bacteria. But there's enough. Just barely enough to work with. Enter Colleen Fitzpatrick, a forensic genealogist, someone who can take the scattered breadcrumbs of genetic data and trace them through the vast networks of ancestry, through birth records and death certificates and family trees that branch across continents and centuries. She works with genetic databases, sites where people have voluntarily uploaded their DNA in search of relatives, in search of heritage, in search of connection. She looks for matches, for people who share segments of DNA with the unknown man, who carry traces of him in their own cells. It's detective work of a new kind, connecting dots across generations, following the threads of heredity backward through time. And slowly, painstakingly, a picture emerges. A family tree takes shape. Names appear. Relationships clarify. The genetic signature of the Somerton man is traced through parents and grandparents, through cousins and second cousins, through the branching pathways of descent. And finally, after 73 years of anonymity, a name rises from the data. Carl Charles Webb. Charles Webb. Born in Melbourne in 1905. An electrical engineer by profession, a maker of things, someone who understood circuits and current and the invisible forces that make the modern world work. He worked for various companies over the years, building instruments, testing equipment, small precise mechanisms that required patience and skill. He was married once, briefly. The marriage ended. There were difficulties. Some accounts suggest he struggled with illness, perhaps epilepsy, perhaps something else. His life, as it comes into focus through records and documents, was marked by movement, by a certain restlessness. He moved from city to city, job to job, never quite settling, never quite finding a place that fit. And he loved poetry. Friends who knew him, those few who can still be traced, whose memories reach back to the 1940s, remember this about him. He carried books. He quoted verses. He was drawn to the romantic poets, to their meditations on beauty and mortality and the fleeting nature of human life. The Rubaiyat would have appealed to him. Its philosophy of living in the present moment, of drinking deeply from life because tomorrow is promised to no one, this would have resonated with a man who seemed to understand, perhaps too well, the fragility of existence. In late 1948, Charles Webb was in Adelaide. Why exactly, no one can say with certainty. Perhaps he was looking for work. Perhaps he was visiting someone. Perhaps he was simply drifting, the way he seemed to have drifted for much of his adult life. And on the night of November 30th or the early morning of December 1st, he walked down to Somerton Beach, dressed in his best suit, carrying poetry in his pocket, and he lay down against the seawall and died. But knowing his name doesn't answer the deeper questions. Was he a spy? The evidence is ambiguous. He had skills that would have been useful for espionage, an understanding of electronics, an ability to move unnoticed, a habit of anonymity. The proximity of Woomera, the coded message, the removed labels, these could suggest involvement in intelligence work, or they could be coincidence, the misreading of ordinary details through the lens of Cold War paranoia. Was he in love with Justin? This seems more likely. The phone number in the book. Her reaction to seeing his face. Perhaps they had an affair. Perhaps he came to Adelaide to see her, found her married with a child, realized there was no future, no place for him in her life. Perhaps the poetry, Tamam Shud, it is finished, was his farewell note, his way of saying that the story was over. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. Perhaps he was simply a man who decided, for reasons known only to himself, that he'd had enough. That the pain, physical, emotional, existential, was too much to carry any longer. Perhaps the beach at dawn, the moment between night and day, seemed like the right place to let go. The code on the back of the book remains unsolved. If it means anything at all, that meaning died with Charles Webb. Justin, who might have known something, who might have been able to shed light on the mystery, died in 2007, taking her secrets with her. Her son, who some suspected might have been Webb's child, died in 2009, also without speaking. The mystery, in some ways, remains. We know who he was, but not entirely why. We have his name but not his full story. The man has been identified, but the mystery, the deeper mystery of what drove him to that beach, what message he was trying to send, what connections existed beneath the surface of things, remains tantalizingly out of reach. Perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps some stories are meant to remain unfinished, open-ended, leaving space for wonder and imagination. Return now to Somerton Beach. Not the beach of 1948, but the beach of tonight, of this very moment. The heat of the day has passed. The Australian summer sun has finally released its grip on the land, sliding below the horizon in a blaze of orange and crimson, leaving behind the velvet coolness of evening. The sand, which was scorching at noon, is now cool beneath your feet. You can feel the retained warmth in the deeper layers, but the surface is pleasant, soft, the perfect temperature for walking. The ocean continues its eternal conversation with the shore. The waves roll in, one after another, with a rhythm older than human memory. The sound is hypnotic, the soft crash as water meets sand, the hiss of foam spreading across the beach, the gentle retreat, and then the pause before the next wave begins its approach. You lie back on the sand, feeling it conform to your body, cradling you. Above, the night sky opens up in a way it never does in cities, in places where artificial light drowns out the stars. Here, far enough from the glow of Adelaide, the sky is a dome of infinite depth, scattered with points of light that have traveled across unimaginable distances to reach your eyes. This is the sky of the southern hemisphere, a different sky than the one visible from the north. The constellations here have different names, different stories. The ancient Greeks never saw these stars. These are the stars that guided different navigators, that were mapped by different cultures, that tell different stories. Look for the Southern Cross, Crux, the smallest constellation in the sky but one of the most distinctive. For bright stars arranged in a cross, tilted at an angle, pointing the way south. For centuries, sailors used it to navigate, following its guidance across empty oceans. It appears on flags, in poetry, in the collective imagination of everyone who has ever lived beneath these southern skies. Near the cross, you can see the two pointer stars, Alpha and Beta Centauri, brilliant points that help you distinguish the true cross from false ones. And if you know where to look, you can find the Magellanic Clouds, small smudges of light that are actually neighboring galaxies, millions of stars so distant they blur together into a faint glow. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a river of light, denser here in the south, more vivid, showing you the spiral arm of the galaxy you live in, your home on a cosmic scale. These are the same stars that shone down on Charles Webb that night in 1948. The same patterns, the same light, though the photons reaching your eyes tonight began their journey decades before he was born. The stars don't care about human mysteries. They don't care about names or secrets or the small dramas that consume our lives. They simply shine, patient and eternal, watching the earth turn beneath them, watching the endless cycle of waves and tides and human lives that flicker into existence and then fade. Charles Webb's story is finished now. The man who was unknown has a name. The mystery that seemed impossible to solve has been, at least partially, solved. The bones in West Terrace Cemetery belong to someone specific, someone real, someone who lived and loved and struggled and eventually found his way to a beach at dawn. But the poetry remains. The strange beauty of the case, the elements that made it compelling, the suit on the sand, the coded message, the torn page with its Persian farewell, these still resonate. They still speak to something deeper than mere facts, something about the human need for mystery, for stories that don't resolve neatly, for questions that linger. Tamam Shud. It is finished. But in another sense, it will never be finished. The case will continue to fascinate, to draw people in, to make them wonder. New theories will emerge. New technologies might reveal further details. The conversation will continue. The way the ocean continues its conversation with the shore. And that's all right. That's as it should be. Some stories belong to the people in them. But some stories belong to all of us, passed down through time, retold and reimagined, serving as mirrors in which we see our own mysteries reflected. The waves continue their rhythm. In and out. In and out. The sound is like breathing, like a heartbeat, like the oldest lullaby in the world. You can feel yourself sinking deeper into the sand, your body growing heavier, more relaxed. The cool night air moves across your skin. The stars will slowly overhead, following their ancient paths. Charles Webb found his rest here, on this beach, under these stars. And now you can rest too. There's nothing more you need to solve. Nothing more you need to figure out. The mystery can wait. The questions can wait. Right now, in this moment, there is only the sand beneath you, the sky above you, and the eternal rhythm of the ocean. Let your breathing synchronize with the waves. Breathe in as they approach. Breathe out as they retreat. Let yourself be rocked by that rhythm, that ancient pattern that predates all human concerns. The Southern Cross turns slowly in the sky. The pointer stars shine steadily. The Magellanic clouds glow softly in their corner of the heavens. And you are safe here, held by the earth, watched by the stars, surrounded by the sound of water finding its way home. His name is known now. His bones have been identified. But his story, the full, true, complete story, belongs to the stars, to the ocean, to the mysteries that make life beautiful and strange and worth living. You can rest now. The tide will continue its work. The stars will continue their vigil. And the mystery will continue, in the space between what we know and what we can never know, in the poetry of unanswered questions. Tamam Shud. It is finished. And you can sleep.